exploring the different views and why people hold the different views. The paper actually, the author, he lands on a view that's different from my own, but I thought it was a good summary of all the different viewpoints anyways. So if you would like a copy of that, I can send that to your email as well.
Did you email that out?
Yeah, maybe I didn't send it to your correct email.
Oh, okay.
Is it maybe your work email or something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to get it.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was surprised you didn't respond. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, Paul, yeah.
Yeah, I would
He's
definitely
uncharacteristically quiet on this one. Maybe he's really mad at me.
No, there's no mad.
Okay, so I'm hoping not to spend a ton of time revisiting the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6. We did a good job, I think, exploring that from all the different angles last week, even though that wasn't my plan. So if you wanted to review that, you can go look at that. I'll just send that article out so that you can take a look at it. He does a good job just looking at the evidence from the scripture of all the different views. Which there are three major ones, really two major ones, and then a kind of a minority view. And then, okay, so the other thing I wanted to mention is, so the sons of God was one issue that we kind of got bogged down in last week. The other issue that we got bogged down in was what I'm calling extra biblical literature. So if we look at literature that's not the Bible, but old ancient literature, stuff that was written right around the time the Bible was written, or maybe closer to the Bible than where we are today, it seemed like some people had some concerns about that. So I just want to be very clear in presenting how I think about those kinds of writings. So first and foremost, we believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God. No more, no less, not other books. So if we look at other books, we keep that in mind. We don't think that these are inspired, and just because they say something doesn't mean it's true. Whereas whatever the author was intending, who wrote parts of the Bible, whatever they were trying to convey is true, we believe that is true because it is inspired scripture. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to say is that the Bible was written a really long time ago in a different time, in a different place, in a different language than any of us know. Okay? So the proper way to understand the Bible is to try to understand that time, that place, and that language as good as we can. She's sleeping because she worked last night. All right. Your wife works at nights. This is what happens. All right. Thankfully, we have a wonderful family here. Okay. The Bible, written a long time ago. And so some people, when I start talking about other texts, other things, they say, why aren't we just learn about the Bible? Why aren't we just focus on the Bible? And I think that's a good aspiration. We have to remember that the Bible, what we actually believe is inspired are the original manuscripts that we have in the original languages, right? That's what we believe is the inspired text. What we have is not that. We have a translation of those original manuscripts, right? And so the reason I make that distinction is because every translation is an interpretation. There's no perfect translation, because the way that translation works is languages don't work one for one. They work in different ways. They have different mechanics. Hebrew is nuts. I'm in the middle of trying to learn it right now, and I'm not doing a good job because it's really difficult. It's really challenging. It's written backwards, right? It's strange. And so I bring that up because the people that are translating our Bibles, I think they do a really good job. They're extraordinarily helpful, but they can have issues and errors from time to time. I don't want to undermine your faith in your translation. I think most modern translations are pretty good. But what I'm trying to convey is that if we say we just want the Bible, we're always kind of working through an interpreter. We're always working through a translator. And the people that are translating our Bibles are scholars that have dedicated their whole lives to studying these texts. But they're not just studying the text, they're trying to study everything they possibly can get their hands on that's written in that language around that time, because that's going to help them understand and translate the language into English better. And so in the same way, that's why if we're looking at other documents, that would always be my hope. It's to better understand the Bible. Not that these documents are always correct or always have the right idea, but hopefully they'll give us a better understanding of the life and culture and language that the Bible uses. Does that make sense? There is a danger because in our kind of crazy world, when you go to colleges, especially secular colleges, but even religious colleges these days, there's a very large group of people that look at these texts in order to undermine the Bible, and they look at these texts in order to make fun or poke holes and make problems with the scriptures. Okay, so I would never want to pursue that. And if you think that I'm doing that, then please talk to me about it, because I don't want to do that. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. And if I bring these things up, that my hope is that we're trying to better understand the Bible in that way. In addition, looking at interpretations that come from people who live at a much closer time to when the Bible was written, their interpretations may not be correct, but they'll give us a good idea of what people were thinking, about the Bible when the Bible, much closer to when the Bible was written. Okay, and so we need to take those things into account, especially if we have a very different interpretation than the one that they had. Okay? And we have to have good reason why our interpretation would be different from theirs. Okay, so those are my caveats. There's a really long set of caveats. Anybody have any questions or comments before we move on to the meat and potatoes of what we're doing today? Okay. I apologize again for not doing a good job teaching last week. I'll try and do better in the future. So homework.
Thomas, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes, sir.
Last week when I was watching online, you mentioned an author in a book that you suggest to read. Can you,
Yeah, so
after
that's
class, maybe tell me that so I can
yeah,
write it
it's on the worksheet from last week at
Okay.
the top,
All right.
or it might be on the week before, but
I have
yeah,
that.
I'll make sure you get that. So the guy's name is Michael Heiser, and he wrote a book called Supernatural, and he also wrote a longer work that is called The Unseen Realm, and it's a more academic version. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Okay, so homework from last week. Did anybody do the homework?
I know it was like 1 Samuel 2,
Yeah.
1 through 14.
Yeah, so we were talking about the omniscience of God versus human free will. What did you find out there?
I'm sorry, I gotta see the first verse so I can remember.
While Jan's looking that up, did anybody else do the homework? Bobby? Okay, so this is my chastisement for my students in my class. Okay, if I don't mind argument, I don't mind disagreement, but I want you guys to be doing the work, right? Like if we're not even going to do, I asked you to look up like 6 verses, I think, this week. It wasn't a whole lot. Like let's do the work, and then we can have some disagreement, some good discussion in class. I'd really appreciate it. All right, Jan, you got it?
I'm sorry, was it 2 Samuel or 1 Samuel?
I think it's 1 Samuel 23, maybe?
23, 1 to 4.
Ah, 23, okay. I definitely read it. Oh, yeah, okay, it was when David was wanting to know from God, should he go to Keilah and attack those people because they were outnumbered. God said yes, and he asked him again, because he heard the Philistines were coming, or maybe Saul. Saul's
Saul.
army was coming, and he wanted to know if that Keilah would give up his army and his men, and God said yes. So David hightailed it out.
Okay. So why is that an interesting interesting exploration of God's omniscience versus our free will.
Well, omniscience means all-knowing.
Yeah.
So God knew what David was asking.
Yeah.
Even before he asked.
Okay, sure. But what's God tell David is going to happen?
The future.
Which is what?
Future. It was his immediate future, what was gonna happen to him as men.
Which was what?
Which was, is that we need to leave this city.
No, that's not what he tells him. What's he tell him is going to happen?
The men are going to give him up.
Yeah. Do the men give him up?
Yeah. Well, no, they don't,
No.
because he leaves. He believes
Okay.
God.
Yeah,
And he
yeah.
says, okay, I'm leaving.
Yeah. So God says, this is what's going to happen. The men are going to give you up to Saul. The men don't give him up to Saul because David leaves. Was God wrong?
No, because he knows the future.
You see what's going on there? So
Yeah.
there's this very interesting scene, and it's, if you don't think about this carefully, then and if you do think about it carefully, then your brain kind of breaks. But it's this, God knows the future, but he also leaves room for us to participate in that future, to have our own free will, to make choices, which can change things. Yes?
Well, the other thing is too, is that at first when God talked to David, and David, he said, go. And then David's men, they were afraid, they didn't want to go. And so then David goes back to God and talks to him again. And God tells him again. So right there was free will going on, because the men had to, they're not just robots, they were afraid. And so, but because of their trust in God, who is all-knowing, they went ahead and believed it and went.
Yeah, and I could talk about Samuel all day. It's one of my favorite
Yeah.
books. But we're going to talk about Genesis for the rest of the day, which is my other favorite book. So I'm still in luck. Okay, so very good. All right, so we're going to move on to the third rebellion of the prologue. So I put a little spot on your sheet to look at the sons of God idea. So you can do that this week, to think about sons of God being angels or righteous men. I'll send everybody that article so you can look at that. You can explore the Bible on your own to do that.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. Apparently, they on like one of the major Bible apps, they move the play button like right next to another button.
It
So
looks like you moved to the next chapter.
yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah.
my sound is off now.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So the third rebellion. Okay. So Genesis 11 is the Tower of Babel. Hopefully, we're all pretty familiar with that story. We're gonna read it here in a moment, but I want some contextual details before we get to Genesis chapter 11. So, what's happening in Genesis around Genesis 11, around the story of the Tower of Babel?
At that time, they all spoke one language, and they said, let us build a statue all the way to heaven.
Okay, yeah. So that's where Babel starts. But in chapter 10, is that the impression you get, that everybody has one language and it's one people all together?
We're all together.
Yeah, we get sometimes this is called the Table of Nations. There are 70 different nations that are listed here, of all these different people, right, from all these different places. Okay? And then in chapter 11, we get what seems like a step backwards. So it's almost like, okay, so the flood happens, Moses comes out, he has sons, there's this strange curse, and all this other stuff happens. But right after that, it's like, okay, and then they start multiplying again on the land. And then in chapter 10, we get this big summary of, well, these are all the people and how they multiplied. But 11 is almost like this, like, let's back up. at some point they were all the same, and then they got multiplied, or then they got divided up. Okay, right? So the story's pretty short. It's 9 verses. So we'll read through this, the Tower of Babel, and then we're going to read over to a reference to it in Deuteronomy 32 here in a moment. All right, so Genesis 11. Now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. It came about as they journeyed east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. They said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven. Let us make for ourselves a name, otherwise we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." Now just a quick aside, that's what God wanted, right? God wanted them to multiply, spread, and fill the earth. And so this is a rebellion. We call it a rebellion because they're saying, no, we're going to make a name for ourselves. It's going to be underneath this tower, and it's going to gather us all into one spot. Okay? So God likes things spread out. He likes this diversity and messiness and this difference amongst people. That's what is just who God is, right? He likes the otherness, and he likes loving people in spite of their differences, right? In spite of the way that they're different from him. And so Babel has a different agenda, the opposite agenda. We want to be the same. We want one language, one nation, one people under the tower, indivisible, with liberty. No, right? It's the one. It's just us. Okay. There's no need to spread out. So it's almost a project in tyrannical unity. Okay. So then the Lord came down to see the tower, to see the city and tower which the sons of men had built. Okay. So they built the tower, and this is the tower that's supposed to reach up to heaven. It's kind of funny because God has to go down to see the tower that supposedly reaches heaven. Right? The Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all the same language, and this is what they began to do. And now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them." Okay? And is that a good thing? Is it a good thing for this people in this state to be able to do anything they set their minds to? No. In the same way, when they got kicked out of the garden, God said, they can't have the tree of life, right? I don't want them to live forever in this state. This is going to be a disaster. And so God says they can't. I don't want them to have this unity while they are unified under this evil purpose, this evil cause. And so, come, let us go down there and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. Oh man, there's that us. There's that stinking us again. Oh boy. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth. Okay, so hopefully that story makes sense. It's clearly a rebellion, and God and his crew, his divine council, are putting a stop to it. And then let's turn over to Deuteronomy 32. Deuteronomy is a very fascinating book. So Deuteronomy is Greek. The word comes from a Greek word. It means the second law, or the second giving of the law. And so Deuteronomos is this second law giving. Okay, so Moses is repeating basically the whole Torah, and so that's kind of how Deuteronomy works. Now it's also a musical number, and whenever I see songs in the Bible, that's what I think of as like a show tunes musical with fancy costumes, and so that's how I think of Moses as breaking out into song in the middle of this very solemn commissioning of Joshua. But you have to remember that songs in the Bible, they're meant to help compress and condense things that have been going on. It's a way for people to remember all the previous stuff that's been happening. Okay, so Deuteronomy 32 is the Song of Moses, and it's going to help us understand all that came before. So I'm going to read a few verses, and we're going to digest it as we go. Give ear, O heavens, and let me speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth. And the heaven, earth, duality there, okay? Let my teaching drop as the rain, and my speech distill as the dew, as the droplets on fresh grass, and as the showers on the herb. Okay, so Moses is the prophet, right? He is the teacher of the Torah, and he is distributing God's wisdom and knowledge like the rain and the dew. For I proclaim the name of the Lord. Ascribe greatness to our God, the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are just. A God of faithfulness and without injustice. Righteous and upright is he. They have acted corruptly toward him. Who's this they? Who's the they? They are not his children because of their defect, but are a perverse and crooked generation. Okay, so we still don't really know who they are. Do you thus repay the Lord, O foolish and unwise people? Is not he your father who has bought you? He has made you and established you. Okay. So maybe the people that he's talking about are the Israelites. Right? That's who he's talking to here. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of all generations. Okay. Days of old, all generations. Is that Israelites? That's everybody, right? This is consider the beginning, almost like consider Genesis. It was one of Moses' best sellers, so it's referring to it here. Ask your father, and he will inform you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of man, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of, your translation might say sons of Israel, might say sons of God. We'll talk about that in a minute. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the allotment of his inheritance. Okay. So there's a separation of peoples, boundaries being set in place, and separating out the sons of man, and giving each nation their inheritance. Okay? So does it make sense why we're saying that this is a reference back to the Table of Nations, to that scene that we saw in the Tower of Babel? Does that kind of make sense? You seeing that? Okay, so we have this reference to all these people, this rebellion that's ongoing, and that there's an inheritance set aside for every nation. Okay, you can think about that as their plot of land, and then that God has an inheritance, and what's God's inheritance? What is it? Jacob. Yeah, it's his people, right? It's Israel. Okay, so we see this here now. Your version might say sons of Israel, and that's actually a difference between some of the manuscripts we get. So one of the reasons I talked about manuscripts at the beginning of this is because we got to talk about manuscripts again. So there are lots of manuscripts out there, especially for the New Testament. We have lots and lots of copies of manuscripts. So when Christians, in the very early years before the printing press, when Christians were doing their thing, Christians were fanatical about making copies of the New Testament. They just loved doing it. They did it a lot. They were very good at it. They did it better than anybody else. No other group had such a high regard for the written word as Christians and Jews did. Okay? And so Christians have this fanatical obsession with making copies. So we have lots of manuscripts of the New Testament. We have some copies of the Old Testament as well, usually in Greek. It's called the Septuagint. So that's the version that Jesus would have used. And that's the version that Jesus quotes when he's quoted as quoting the Old Testament. So he's quoting the Greek version of the Old Testament called the Septuagint. Now, all the manuscripts that we have, so every once in a while we'll see errors or differences between our copies. Okay? And what's cool is if you are into this kind of thing, you can actually search through all the records that we have, search through all the manuscripts. You can see the differences, and you can trace an error or a transcription or something as it goes through, and you can trace it all the way back to see where it came from, where it originated from. And so the older manuscripts are obviously more valuable because they have fewer of these errors. We can see what the original probably looked like. We don't have any of the original manuscripts because the documents just don't generally survive that long. We do have some extraordinarily old manuscripts. They're called the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were found about 75 years ago in a cave in the Middle East, and it just happened to be stored in all these jars by these crazy people who lived out in the desert called the Essenes, out in this place called Qumran, which is literally in the middle of the desert. They would pipe in water like from 3 miles away so that they could have running water for their mitzvah, basically their ritual bath that they would use. Okay, so they were serious about their religion, right? And they were also fanatical about making these copies, and so they stored all these copies of the book of Isaiah and lots of other things that we have in these jars. And somebody found them 75 years ago, just in this cave. A shepherd boy was like throwing rocks into the cave, and he heard a shattering, and so they went in and investigated, and they just pulled out reams and reams of all these documents that have been perfectly sealed for us. So the oldest manuscript that we have, so this is what I'm getting to, is from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in that manuscript, in this verse in Deuteronomy, it says, according to the number of the sons of God. Okay. Now, why is that detail important, and why are we focusing on it? Well, to me, I think this is, again, another indication that Moses is telling this story about the Tower of Babel. And in the Tower of Babel, we have this rebellion that goes on, and he sets up all these nations after he's done with the tower, and he's basically delegating all these nations to the sons of God. He has 70 sons of God, and he's setting up these nations, and he says, all right, you all to rule over this. I'm going to start about on my project of Project Israel with Abram at the time. And you all keep watch on these people, and this is my people, and this is how I'm going to do my restoration project for the world. Okay. So, if that's the case, then what seems to be going on here, and what we see in Psalm 82 and all these other rebellious sons of God type stories, is that these spiritual beings, which God set over these nations, at some point rebel, either accept worship from the people that they're supposed to be over, or they are not enforcing the kind of justice and righteousness that God wants. And so there's this falling away of all the other nations. And when you start looking at, so the reason I think this is right is because a lot of the discussion around the foreign nations makes much more sense when you view that the deity that they worship, it's not that it's a pretend deity, but it's that it's this rebellious spiritual being that is accepting worship from them. Okay, so I just ran through a lot. What are your thoughts, and what's not making sense, or what are you confused about? Yes.
Genesis 11:5. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built.
Yes.
So again, the offending party here, it seems to be humankind.
Yeah, I don't think that the tower is being built by the sons of God. What seems to be happening is that the table of nations, right, which comes in chapter 10, seems to be a division of all these people and a delegation of God and his authority to these other nations. Was that?
Can you simplify it just a little bit more? I'm sorry, I'm catching up with what you're saying, but
Yeah.
I guess I'm not getting the crux of what you're.
Yeah, so what seems to be going on between Genesis 10 and 11 and then Deuteronomy 32 is that Moses is describing this spiritual realm, okay? I think one of the reasons he doesn't clearly lay it out is because this is really just spiritual, common cultural understanding for the Israelites and for everybody else, is that, yeah, every nation has a God that rules over it in a certain territory, and maybe we'll talk about that here in a second too.
Okay.
But the idea is that God delegates authority to all these other nations, to all these other spiritual beings, and in some way there's this final rebellion at the beginning of Genesis that we see where these nations are being led astray by these gods.
So the implication is that these gods are actual gods, not just created images that man has created for himself.
Yeah, they're spiritual beings that are accepting worship in some way.
So, sorry.
I'll just say, would that tie into when God said worship other gods, you said me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there are others, but I'm one.
Yeah, so there's this tension in the Old Testament that we come upon a lot, where it's there at one time, on one hand we say there are no gods but Yahweh, but at the same time we say that Yahweh is the God of gods, right, and the Lord of lords, and so really one of the ways that I thought the Bible Project's video from last week did a really good job explaining it was that the way that the Israelites thought of it was that God is the God of gods, and that there is no God like God. So while there are these other deities, these spiritual beings that are put in charge of over these other nations, they're not like the God, the creator of the universe. They're these created beings that were given authority and failed with that authority, and so they cause all these problems for Israel and are trying to lure the Israelites into worshiping their gods, right? And the Israelites have a problem with that, right? They think, yeah, that might be a good idea. I might should go worship that God, and they do, right? They bring their worship into the temple of that God with their idols and things.
So if this is how it was set up, right, that God gave these other territories over to these other spirits, if that's the way it's set up, is there any indication that any of them got it right? Right? Because I mean, if we look throughout Scripture, right, like, and we are supposed to be partnering with God, there's a lot of indications where, like humanity makes, or at least a human makes a good decision, right, in line with what God wants, and chooses to do the right thing and makes the right decision, and that is how God's plan is furthered in that instance. Is there any indication that these other gods that were set over the remaining territories, is there any indication that any of them got it right? Because if they are sons of God given the same opportunity to make good decisions, you figure, like, to some extent, there had to be some of them that got it right? Just by accident.
Yeah.
And
No.
I'm just wondering, is there any indication?
Yeah, I don't think so. You see, we get the veil pulled back a little bit in books like Daniel, right? Where Daniel is speaking to Nebuchadnezzar, he's speaking to the king, and he's saying, you got to do justice. You got to do these things right. You got to care for the people that are on the margin, right? You got to do these things, otherwise your time's up, right? And it's not just Daniel. It's like all the prophets have this constant idea of, like, it doesn't matter if you're Israel or not, because Israel and Judah, they're the only ones in a covenant relationship with Yahweh. But like, if you don't act right, you're going to come to an end, right? So yes, I think there is an indication that they ought to be doing right, and sometimes they do things that are right, but overall these nations are constantly struggling to do that because they don't have the Torah, they don't have the covenant, they don't have these things. And they're also struggling because Israel is the one that does have it, and even they're struggling, and they're not acting in a way that's supposed to bring these nations into Israel, and they can learn at the foot of the temple, right? They can get this wisdom from them. So, yes, sir.
Just trying to read through the Bible, it seems like there are times where the Bible refers to angels as the sons of man, the sons of God, and also refers to human people, man, as the sons of God. So there's times in the Bible that both groups, one not like man, we don't see the creation of the angels spelled out in Genesis the way that we see the creation of what we see.
Yeah, in that article that I was mentioning earlier, it does a pretty good job of looking at some of that stuff. So take a look at that this week, and I think it'll be helpful because once we get in, especially into New Testament territory, Jesus is the Son of Man and the Son of God, and he's the firstborn of the dead, and he's bringing us into the family as adopted brothers and sisters so that we can be the sons and daughters of God. And before that, it's I think much more like the angels and things that you're talking about.
The other thing is I think that God always reserves for himself. So when he separated the table of nations, he's always going to reserve something for himself.
Yeah.
As a remnant.
Yeah.
And that's Israel.
Yeah. Real quick, let's turn to 2 Kings 5. I think this is a very quick and easy point. You can just see it plain as day. There, the theology and mindset of the people. Okay, so this is Naaman. He is the foreigner with leprosy, and he goes to Elisha, the prophet, who's an Israelite. Okay, so he goes there. He heals Naaman, even though he doesn't believe that he's going to. He comes back and he says, "I'm only going to worship Yahweh from now on. Yahweh's the only God." And verse 15 says, "When he returned to the man of God with all his company and came and stood before him, he said, 'Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So please take a present from your servant now.' But he said, 'As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will take nothing.' And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Naaman said, 'If not, please let your servant at least be given 2 mules' load of earth. For your servant will no longer offer burnt offering, nor will he sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord.'" So he wants piles of dirt. Why does he want piles of dirt from Israel? Yeah, this is God's land. I need some of that to bring back with me so that I can properly worship God on God's land. Okay? And so whether that's the right way to think about it, Elisha does let him do that. And this is just how they're thinking, right? So every god has its own territory, and that's how it's spread out. Now we're out of time. One last thing. So why does this matter, and how does this work today? Okay, so Israel is no longer the land itself, right? Where is the cosmic geography that God is redeeming and that he is the Lord of?
The easy answer is he's Lord of heaven and earth.
Yeah, but he's always been Lord of heaven and earth, so no easy answers here. Where's his kingdom?
In the hearts of men.
Yeah, it's the church, right? It's his people. We are citizens of heaven. We are part of this territory that he is bringing his rule and reign over. Okay. All right, so got some homework there for you. Check that out. You can also consider some of the other passages. Thank you for your time and participation this week. Thanks.